a.m. now if you want to get going.
Okay, you ready? Okay. Hi, I'm Todd Lefkoe, and I'm chairperson of the Russian American Business and Culture Council. One of the important issues in citizen diplomacy is the idea of relationships between both individuals and institutions. This should be basically an easy process for even during the Cold War, exchanges of people and infrastructure and intellectual content was exchanged between Russia and the United States. We are facing problems now where that exchange is being limited, both in terms of individuals and in terms of artifacts. This is an incredibly important issue. We are honored today to have with us the co-chair, the chairman, executive director of our partner in this program, Mark Meister, who's the director of the Museum of Russian Art in Minneapolis, one of the outstanding institutions in America. He has put together an outstanding panel, and so Mark, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Todd. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this program about the Russian art embargo. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation, so please enter them using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And now I will introduce today's panelists. Michael Perekrestov came to the Russian History Foundation in Jordanville, New York in 2012 and has served as the executive director of the Russian History Museum there since 2018. Prior to that, he worked at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, and was a junior fellow at the Library of Congress. His research interests are in the history of late imperial Russia and the Russian diaspora. Kent Russell is the executive director of the Museum of Russian Icons in Clinton, Massachusetts, a position that he's held since it opened in early 2006. Kent spent the previous 11 years as the director of the Higgins Armory Museum in Worcester, Massachusetts. His art history career started in Dublin at the National Gallery of Ireland in the mid-1970s, and he managed the Arts Council of Northern Ireland's Contemporary Art Gallery in Belfast in the 1980s. Additionally, he has held positions at the Municipal Gallery of Modern Art in Dublin, the Parish Art Museum in Southampton, Long Island, the Fitchburg Art Museum in Massachusetts, as well as other institutions. Dr. Masha Zavialova, a native of St. Petersburg, Russia, is the chief curator at the Museum of Russian Art in Minneapolis. Since 2008, she has curated more than 70 exhibitions at the museum. She also works on independent curatorial projects and writes for art catalogs. She's an award-winning translator into Russian of the writings of African-American women, a co-director of the folk performance group NITKA, and a board member of the American Siberian Educational Foundation. So to begin, I'm going to briefly describe the circumstances that led to the embargo. In a court case in Moscow in 1991, the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidic movement, based in Brooklyn, called for the return from the Soviet Union of what is known as the Schneerson Library, a collection of 12,000 books and over 50,000 religious documents assembled by the sect over 2 centuries. Part of the collection came into Russian hands after World War I, with the remainder obtained at the end of World War II. Chabad claimed that the library was held illegally by the Soviet authorities after the war. The court in Moscow ruled that the library should be returned to the Chabad organization, but the Soviet Union then collapsed and the judgment was set aside by the Russian authorities. In 2005, Chabad sued the Russian Federation, the Russian Ministry of Culture and Mass Communications, the Russian State Library, and the Russian State Military in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia for the library's return. And on July 30th, 2010, the court ruled in favor of Chabad, ordering Russia to turn over all Schneerson documents held by the defendants. Russian officials, saying that an American court had no jurisdiction, had refused to participate in the proceedings, and the Russian Foreign Ministry denounced the decision as a violation of international law. The ministry said an American court had no right to get involved in a case concerning Russian assets on Russian soil. The Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit then affirmed in 2010 that the Russian defendants are not immune from suit because the library was taken in violation of international law, particularly with respect to the initial victory in the Soviet court in 1991 that was overruled by executive action after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Rather than defend the case back in court, however, the Russian defendants filed a statement with respect to further participation, informing the court that they simply would not participate further in proceedings in a court that they claimed had no jurisdiction over them. Ultimately, this resulted in the DC court imposing a $50,000 per day fine in 2013 against the defendants for every day that the library was not returned. And I'm going to share a screen right here. Okay, so what you're seeing are some headlines from 2011. So meanwhile, after the court decision in 2010, Russian cultural officials began warning Russia's state-controlled museums that any artwork lent to the United States was at risk of being seized by the American authorities to force Russia to abide by the decision. Existing loan agreements with American museums were canceled, and no new agreements have been initiated since then. The State Department tried to convince the Russian government that under US law, there's a statute that grants immunity from judicial process for works on loan from foreign countries. But Russian officials remained unconvinced and said they wanted more legal assurances that loaned works would be immune from seizure. With that, I'm going to stop and ask the panelists how their institutions were immediately impacted by the 2010 court decision and the Russian reaction. So Masha, I will start with you.
Masha, you're on mute, I think.
I'm sorry. Yes, I want to thank Mark for sharing the historical context for this embargo, and just wanted to talk a little bit about our museum's involvement in this. In around 2011, 2012, we found ourselves in the midst of the conflict when we decided to organize an exhibition of Nikolai fashions through the Foundation of International Arts and Education. So we worked with them. They were actually the organizers. And this exhibition was supposed to arrive in our museum in August, mid-August 2012. From at least 6 or 7 different museums and galleries in the United States and in Russia. The museums that agreed to loan pieces to us were the State Tretyakov Gallery, the State Russian Museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts of the Republic of Tatarstan. So let me share my screen. I will show you just a few slides from that time. This is the Nikolai fashion we did not get. The exhibition came also, some of the paintings came from the Fry Museum, and I went to Moscow in May of 2012. So it seems that in 2012, at least at the beginning, it was not yet quite clear, or the embargo was not yet enforced and didn't acquire the full impact yet. And there was hope that with this exhibition, because there was a prior agreement that the Foundation for International Arts and Education reached in apparently end of 2010, in 2011, that at least the Russian Ministry of Culture would honor the previous agreements. So I went to the opening together with Greg Gurov and Kathy Gurov from the foundation, and we talked to the representatives of the State Tretyakov, the State Russian Museum, and also the Ministry of Culture. So this, what you can see here is the painting that we did not get. Probably we would not get it anyway. It's the prized treasure of the Museum of Fine Arts in Kazan, Tatarstan. So the contract was signed by us with the foundation on March 8th, 2012. And you can see here that the exhibition is organized by the Foundation of International Arts and Education. Also, the exhibition center Rosezo under the, it was actually a branch of the Ministry of Culture responsible for traveling shows, organizing international exhibitions. And these are the loans. You can see the highlighted red here that were supposed to come from the museums in Russia. So here you can see the State Museum of Fine Arts of the Republic of Tatarstan, the Tretyakov Gallery, the State Russian Museum in St. Petersburg, all approved, and more. These are the paintings from mostly from those three museums. There was another small museum that we were supposed to receive. So the opening at the Tretyakov Gallery happened in May, and the exhibition still came to Minneapolis, but mostly from the collections here locally, and also from private collectors in Russia. So this painting came from the Taos Museum, or actually from the family of Nikolai Feshin. And here we see the amendment to the contract. So what it says is that the Foundation for International Arts and Education will work with Rosezo, and the Rosezo, that's the international traveling exhibitions organization in Russia, promised to organize the loans and cover the shipping from private lenders, Russian private lenders, and they did. So they honored at least this part of the agreement. And even though we got this exhibition, we had to postpone the opening and cut it down by half. We only used our main gallery to show this exhibition. Also, you can see here the small painting from a private collector in Russia. We also began to look around. I got in touch with a private gallery and found this quite rare portrait that even some experts on Nikolai Feshin in Russia did not know of, or did not know the location of. So we showed it only in our museum. It did not travel anywhere from a private American collection. And I will stop sharing my screen. And this is our story. This is how it all began for us, with the actual direct involvement in the embargo.
So moving on, Kent, I know you have a very significant story to tell in this regard.
Yes, sadly, there were a number of American museums that by March 2011 were directly affected by the embargo. They included LA County, the Metropolitan, and mostly and most significantly my museum, the Museum of Russian Icons, where we had borrowed 43 icons from the Rublev Museum. And these had been delivered to us and were installed in our gallery. The total budget for that exhibition exceeded $800,000, which included catalogs, freight, all the usual kind of things that you can imagine. And I'll share a few slides as I'm talking, just to give you some visuals. I have no idea why it's not sharing now. Wait a second. Anyway, I'll continue talking. The issue with us was by March 2011, we were approached by the Ministry of Culture through correspondence demanding that we return the exhibition. And we wrote that this was unreasonable. We had a contract with them. We had another 4 months to run on the exhibition, that we had paid $120,000 for a full page ad in the New York Times and all those kinds of issues. And what happened, just very briefly, is that the Russian embassy legal counselors came up to Clinton to meet with the founder of the museum, Gordon B. Langton, and his team of lawyers, both those that he engaged privately and lawyers that were employed by his plastics manufacturing company called NIPRA. So we had a meeting with 3 lawyers on the staff of the Russian embassy in Washington, plus some consular officers, and our 6 lawyers, and Gordon Langton and myself. And it was an acrimonious and very difficult meeting. And the upshot was that the founder of the museum just simply said no. He would not return the icons. And they invoked force majeure, which in strict legal terms is something like an earthquake or a world war, a major event. And again, our lawyers pushed back and said that this Schneerson finding in the DC District Court did not amount to a force majeure, and therefore we would not do it. The long and the short of it is that we are the Museum of Russian Icons. Our relationships to our colleagues in Russia, our relationship with the state museum system, the customs officials of Russia, is so significant and central to our mission that we decided to comply with their demands and to return the show and accept the loss. Adding salt to the wounds, at the very end, there was an effort to make us pay for the freight and the return of the icons, which is what we all know, if you do it at the last minute, is beyond enormously expensive. And so we were able to simply negotiate our way out of that, and the Russian authorities picked up the responsibility for returning the exhibition. But that's us in a nutshell. The sad outcome of this, the sad outcome of the embargo, is that none of us can effectively borrow from state institutions. It's possible to borrow from private collections, but that has inherent difficulties and limitations. And so the Museum of Russian Icons had to shift from our opening exhibition, which was Treasures from the State Tretiakov Gallery, our relationship with the Palach Museum and Rossiso, where we imported a number of exhibitions. And the last exhibition that we did was a one-on-one with the Andrei Rublev Museum. Those relationships are now frozen and no longer exist. So we have not presented any major Russian-owned exhibitions since March 2011. And that's our story. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Kent, for telling us about that situation. So now I'd like to ask the panelists about how your institutions are working around the embargo. Michael, why don't you talk about that?
Thank you, Mark. So first, I want to offer my condolences to Kent and to Masha on this, and just listening to all that you had to go through is incredible. And to anyone, I think to our audience who may not be familiar with the inner workings of a museum, the amount of time that goes into loans, and especially international loans, is huge, and the expense that goes along with it is enormous, some of the numbers that Kent you've quoted are just mind-boggling. So I applaud both of you for your resilience, and again offer my sympathies that you had to go through all of this. I did want to note that our museum fortunately was not affected by this, because even though the museum has been around since 1985 officially, it's only around 2012 that we really began to have more of an outward perspective, and to open up our museum to the public on a regular basis, and really started to partner with other museums through loans and other projects, and to have collaboration. So for the audience members who are not familiar with our museum, I just wanted to show where we are located. This is Holy Trinity Monastery in Jordanville, which is it's in central New York. You can see it's not a thriving metropolis. It's very rural, and so that also, I think, contributed to the fact that we were not really at that point, at the time of the embargo, we're not really involved with Russian loans coming in the direction of west. So to briefly talk about some of the collaborations that we've had with Russian institutions and how we've gotten around the embargo. This is the interior of our museum. And as I mentioned, it's only recently, around 2014, that our museum went and underwent a redesign, and we've opened to the public. So all of our activity post-dates the embargo. So our entire, all of our collaboration has sort of been going west-east rather than the other way around. And so that's the approach I'm going to take right now when talking about ways that we've been able to skirt the embargo, and rather than take a chronological approach, talk about going from the US and then towards Russia in the various projects that we were involved with. So actually, I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, Masha, especially you, but I wanted to share this image from the 2015 Faces of War exhibition, which took place at the Museum of Russian Art in Minneapolis, and to which we contributed, I think it was about 50 loans of objects related to the Russian military and to the World War I period. This was a collaboration between the Museum of Russian Art and several state agencies, but of course, because of the embargo, it was impossible for the Minneapolis Museum to borrow any actual pieces, and all of the pieces that came from Russia were facsimiles or digital images and digital audiovisual materials. So this was an opportunity for us to contribute to this kind of collaboration by providing the 3D objects and the actual artifacts that are in our collection, and to really help bring this exhibition to life. So I'm not going to go too much more into this, because I imagine, Masha, you might want to talk about this exhibition as well. But there are a few items from this exhibition that are from our museum. So you can see elements of photographs, armaments, uniforms, etc. So that's one way that we skirted the issue in the US. The next sort of subcategory would be collaboration on so-called neutral ground. So there were a couple of collaborations that we participated in that took place outside of the US and outside of Russia. So the slide that you see over here is an exhibition about the history of Hessian princesses in the history of Russia that took place in Frankfurt in Germany at the Ikonen Museum, the Museum of Icons. And there were two Russian organizations, the Rosizo, which has been mentioned several times before, the exhibition arm of the Ministry of Culture, as well as the Elizabeth Sergius Educational Society. And they came together to put this exhibition together in Frankfurt. And this explored the lives, the biographies of 4 Hessian princesses who ended up marrying members of the Romanov family. Among them, the 2 most recent ones were Alexandra Fyodorovna and Elizaveta Fyodorovna, who were sisters, and one became a Russian empress, the last Russian empress, and her sister married a Grand Duke. So on the right, you see some examples of pieces that we brought to the exhibition, and you can't really see it over here in the slide, but this is a pearl earring that belonged to Alexandra Fyodorovna and was found during the investigation of the imperial family's murder in 1918, 1919. So these are some of the items that are in our collection, and we were able to bring them to Frankfurt for the benefit of audiences who visited the Frankfurt Museum. So here are a couple of more images from that exhibition. And that was in 2017. So in 2018, we also participated in an exhibition in London at the Science Museum. And incidentally, our museum was the one that provided the most loans, numerically speaking, to this exhibition, which again was a meeting place of European, American, and Russian institutions. So it is nice that Europe is not affected by the embargo, because there is this opportunity to meet on neutral ground and to continue collaboration. So this exhibition 2018 was called The Last Tsar, Blood and Revolution, and some of the entities that collaborated and that participated in this exhibition were the Kremlin Museums, the British Library, the State Hermitage, Tsarskoye Selo, the State Archive of the Russian Federation, the Imperial War Museums, and the Cleveland Museum of Art, of course, our museum as well. So you can see in this photograph a piece from our collection, which is the military jacket of Tsarevich Alexis, son of Nicholas II, being installed, and Edward, Duke of Kent, who was at the opening, viewing some of the objects that we brought on loan for this particular exhibition. Here is a photograph of the military jacket that we brought for the exhibition. And here I am, yours truly, with the director of the Kremlin Museums, Yelena Gagarina. And what I wanted to point out in the right slide is that you have 2 Fabergé eggs, one from the Kremlin Museums and the other from the Cleveland Museum of Art. And so this is, I think, a visual example and a symbol of the coming together of these pieces on neutral ground. So it was very encouraging to see that there is a way to meet in areas where neither outside of the jurisdiction of the US government and the Russian government, to continue collaboration. And then finally, I wanted to mention some collaboration that we have had with state museums in Russia proper. And so, of course, the embargo is generally one way. It is, the Russians are not lending to the US. However, some of the larger institutions in the US have also, I don't want to say retaliated, because that's not the right word, but reciprocated, shall we say, by not lending some pieces to Russia as well, I think out of well-founded fears. So, but our institution as a small sort of private museum has had the opportunity to work with Russian museums on a number of occasions. And this actually goes back to 2012. In 2012, 2013 and 2014, we participated in an exhibition that was organized by the State Russian Archive, GARF. And the theme of the exhibition was the death of the family of Nicholas II, a century-long investigation. And again, you can see the military jacket of Alexis that we lent, as well as some of the other pieces from our collection that belonged to the imperial family. So those exhibitions took place in Moscow at the State Archive the following year in Yekaterinburg, the site of the murder of the imperial family, and lastly in St. Petersburg at this St. Peter and Paul Fortress. So we were able to collaborate directly with state institutions, and so they borrowed some pieces from us, and we were able to show them to Russian audiences. And then 2 others that I want to briefly mention is in 2017, you can see the venue of one of the other exhibitions that we participated in. It's the Manège in Moscow, And you can see it's very, very close, just outside of the Kremlin walls. So right in the heart of Russia, shall we say. And for this exhibition, it was dedicated to the history of Russian Cadet Corps, beginning with the Russian Imperial era, and to the present day. And so we lent a few objects largely related to the Russian emigre experience and the various military schools that were founded outside of Russia as a result of the evacuation of the White Army and the creation of a large Russian diaspora outside of Russia. So again, this was in collaboration with Rosizo. And the last thing I want to mention, which is current and ongoing, we have several pieces, 50 pieces from our collection on exhibit at the Cameron Gallery, which is in Tsarskoye Selo. And the exhibition that is going on right now is called At the Sovereigns Stirrup, which explores the history of various mounted escorts that accompanied the imperial family, and specifically the convoy, the Imperatorski convoy, or the imperial escort, which was constituted of the bravest and most accomplished Cossacks. And so from our collection, probably the most important piece that we lent to the exhibition was this banner, or rather a standard, a St. George standard, which was awarded by Alexander II to the unit and has not been in Russia since 1917. So this is what was quite a significant loan for us, and of course for the Russians, because for anybody who is a military expert and military enthusiast, to see something like this was eye-opening and created quite the stir. So the other element that I wanted to close with is some of the pieces that relate to the existence of the convoy, the escort outside of Russia in the emigre years, especially in the interwar years. And in addition to actually lending pieces, one other way that we have been able to collaborate is by digitizing some materials that were included in the exhibition catalog. So one of the chapters in this exhibition catalog is almost entirely made up of images from our collection, because they deal with the emigre period. So I'd like to conclude with that, and I ask your pardon if I've gone far too long, but the upshot is that there is this continued collaboration, which we're happy to continue, and I'm optimistic.
Well, thanks, Michael. That's a tremendous amount of collaboration in a relatively short time, both in Europe and in Russia. So, Masha, how has the Museum of Russian Art dealt with the embargo situation?
We also continue to try and keep our connection going. Well, I have my personal connections with the State Tretyakov Gallery and the head of the Department of the 20th Century Russian art, which is mostly Soviet art, which is what we collect. A significant section of our collection comes from the Soviet era. So I have been in touch with her. But we also had exhibitions that this way or another tried to preserve our connections with our Russian colleagues. And I will want to share just several ways in which this was possible. Here are some examples of, I hope you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Some of the exhibitions that we had together in partnership and in collaboration with Russian museums, galleries, and artists. And this exhibition happened in 2013. It's called Jewish Life in the Russian Empire, photographs from the Museum of Ethnography in St. Petersburg, Russia. These were all prints. They are not originals. They were printed for the purpose of this traveling exhibition. it was shown also in New York. This selection of photography was quite spectacular. A lot of it came from the ethnographic exhibition in Moscow in 1867, also from some photographs from the collection of Ansky, who traveled beyond the pale of settlement and did a lot of photography at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. Another exhibition that we had also in 2013, 2014, the Romanovs, Legacy of an Empire Lost. This was our most attended exhibition. I worked with the Foundation for Russian History and Michael Perekrestov. We borrowed a lot of pieces from that museum. And we also worked with a publisher, the Literacy publisher in St. Petersburg, Russia. It's a private publishing house, and they shared some of the photographs that they took of the contemporary views of the place where the remains of the family of the last emperor, his wife and children were found. And I'm sure Michael probably knows this publishing house. We also worked with individual artists. Alexander Vyazminsky, a resident of St. Petersburg, he visited our museum and he shared his beautiful watercolors of mushrooms. He is a botanical artist. So there are these connections directly with Russian artists who live in Russia. Also, we had several exhibitions that we worked with state Russian entities. And one of them, the biggest one, was Faces of War, Russia in World War I. And Michael mentioned this exhibition and showed a couple of slides from our museum. I just want to add that you can see here the organizations that were involved and organized this exhibition: the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation, the Federal Archival Agency of the Russian Federation, the State Archives, the State Museum and Exhibition Center, Rosizo. And they went, this was a very big exhibition for the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War in Moscow, enormous, involving thousands and thousands of pieces, a lot of documentary material such as photographs and films. The Russians went to the extent of doing facsimile reproductions of the documents that were shown in this exhibition in Moscow and sent those to us. They were remarkably well done. They were like almost like someone trying to fake these documents and sell them in the international market. They were that well done. And here you can see a telegram from Kaiser Wilhelm to Nicholas II and a letter from Nicholas II to Wilhelm, July 1914, when they still tried to, at least Nicholas II, according to these documents, tried to avoid the war. Also, we had an exhibition of the Battle of Stalingrad with the Russian Cultural Center and Russia's Central Museum of the Great Patriotic War, all photography. That was a pop-up show, just a few days, and an exhibition that was in collaboration with the State Museum of the History of St. Petersburg, Russia, the Siege of Leningrad, where we received a lot of fascinating material from them. We actually worked with the State Museum of the History of St. Petersburg starting from 2010, I believe. And we wanted to bring these materials in the actual artifacts, but then it took very long to figure out how to ship and what kind of grants to apply for until we hit the embargo. And only in 2017, the State Museum of the History of St. Petersburg sent us a lot of fascinating materials, also all facsimile, film, documentary footage, photography, prints of posters, prints of paintings that were done by artists during the siege of Leningrad and St. Petersburg. And what was great in this collaboration, that the State Museum sent their own specialists to install the show. So we actually worked with the people, our colleagues from the Museum of the History of St. Petersburg that came over here, and we worked together installing the show. That was a very, very nice part of that exhibition. And yeah, this is all I wanted to share about.
Well, yeah, it's very interesting how willing the state institutions are and were in regard to sharing facsimiles. So at least that avenue could stay open. So Kent, what experience did you have at the Museum of Russian Icons?
Well, as I mentioned, really, we haven't done anything since the embargo. The issue for us, of course, is that we're a museum of Russian icons. So, you know, facsimiles and documents and things like that don't really work for us. The kind of material we would be looking for are the icons themselves. So we're in a little bit of a difficulty there. What we have done since March of 2011 is that we continue to work with the American Art Museum Directors Association, AAMD, and of course, before he died, we were working closely with Gurov, as well as the Museum of Russian Art in Minneapolis. Wonderful guy, formerly cultural attaché to our embassy in Moscow, and very well connected. And our senators in Washington were both very helpful. Actually, the senators, both from Massachusetts and New Hampshire, attempted to intervene on our behalf. And we've been advocating for some resolution about the immunity issue that the Russian authorities believe could be possible. It's a complicated legal relationship between the two nations, between the United States and the Russian Federation, leading to a full immunity. There's paranoia on both sides, and that's our problem, paranoia and lack of trust. And as long as that exists, I don't believe that anybody I've spoken to in authority, either legal authority or governmental authority in this issue, believe that immunity legislation can be articulated to satisfy the Russian Federation for them to release American museums from this embargo for exchange or loan from Russia of art. So apart from this behind the scenes attempt to be helpful, we remain harmed by the existing situation, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what you were saying about immunity, that is a perfect segue into what I was going to discuss next, and that is, as you see right here, this photograph. So as time passed, a law signed by President Obama on December 16th, 2016, granted foreign states immunity from US jurisdiction in cases related to the temporary exhibition of loaned artworks and objects of cultural significance. There are exceptions to the bill, however, such as for property rights cases that violate international law. And I think that is the crux for the Russians, that clause was still in there, and that the question about that, as the US felt that international law had been violated, and the Russians, of course, believed that it hadn't. Ultimately, this led to a conference regarding the situation, and that's the photo you see that took place at the Meadows Art Museum at Southern Methodist University in Dallas on February 13th, 2019. So you see Glenn Lowry, the director of the Museum of Modern Art. So he's seated on the end of the row on the left, and Hermitage director Mikhail Piotrovsky, seated at the end of the row on the right, along with US and Russian diplomats, were in attendance. Ultimately, despite some optimism when this meeting took place, the conference did not result in a resolution to the problem. So I guess my question now for the panelists is, where do we go from here? What are your thoughts? What has to happen, or what do you think the situation will stay in regard to this embargo?
Well, I think until an absolutely clear legislation takes place at the United States level, that Russia will not agree to any amendments or definitions that would include the possibility of any seizure. And that, I think, is the stumbling block, and it remains.
Also, one of the things that would prevent the our Russian partners, the Russian side, to resolve the situation is the fine that's imposed. So unless if they begin to start, working through the conflict and agreeing to some of the terms, what happens to the fine? I think it's enormous. It should be enormous by now, and. This is one of the things that I think will be one of the major obstacles in resolving the situation. And I remember when I was in Moscow in 2012 and met with the representatives together with Greg and Casey, Greg Gurov, representatives of Rosazo and the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation. Someone mentioned that the whole conflict was heading the way out of which only the decisions at the very top level of the administration of both countries would resolve, which means the presidents of the two countries. That's how it was discussed back then, 10 years ago. And probably, I don't know, I'm sure there were several attempts on both sides to somehow get out of this. Because what I call this, it's a Cold War of museums happening. But so as far as I know, the presidents of the US and Russia have not yet come together to resolve this specific conflict and problem.
Right, and I think you're correct to point out that the fine is a new stumbling block, just because, originally the case just had to do with international art law. Now it has to deal with how to, take care of, as you said, is a huge, huge fine at this point in time. So it is, I think you are correct, something that's going to have to be taken into account and only handled right at the top.
I don't have any solutions, obviously none of us do, but I actually would be curious to know, maybe we could do a part 2 with Russian curators from Russia and exploring their side of the story and how that has affected them, because I imagine nobody's really happy with this embargo, and it's harmful to both sides. I think I can only hope that relations between the US and Russia improve, and that this is one of the issues that gets resolved. But in the meantime, I think that we're all trying to maintain good relations with our Russian colleagues, and hopefully when the time comes, those relationships will be there so we can pick up where things have been left off, and we can continue to work for the benefit of our mutual audiences, and not specifically related to the embargo or the Russians, but I think that I wanted to thank Mark and Masha and Kent for coming together, because I think that this is also an opportunity for our museums, all of our museums, to come together, those that have Russian collections, for increased collaboration, and hopefully, at least for the benefit of US audiences.
Well, thank you for that. I'm looking at the chat right now. I don't see any questions. Audience, do you have any questions for us in regard to this situation or the things that you've heard today? I don't see anything coming up. Well, with that, any final comments from the panelists? Anything you'd like to say that you haven't already been able to share today?
We have one audience member who's asking. Andrew Smith has raised his hand.
Okay, I don't.
Yeah, might.
Yeah, go ahead.
Didn't know if my mic would work. With it turning into I guess how much of this you're discussing the point where it's, going into a situation where political leaders, like the presidents, are going to have to discuss this issue. I guess how much stock do museums have in the hope that, I guess, the political leaders at this point will value a discussion about cultural artifacts such as this? And I guess how frequently in the past have those kinds of conversations come up? Because I imagine that's a discussion that takes place once there is an acknowledgement that de-escalation is necessary from a cultural standpoint. And I feel like at this point, there's so much more of an emphasis in the American sphere when discussing this as a political piece rather than a cultural discussion. I guess is there any hope that there is going to be a, I guess, culturally focused discussion going on between the two political bodies at this point from the museum world? Is there any hope that that's a thing?
Well, it seems that it could be a logical start to try to warm relations between the two countries, so that, perhaps cultural exchange would be the way to, just begin the conversation that will lead to other important political considerations in the relationship between the US and Russia. That would be, of course, both countries would have to, the top leadership would have to buy into that and start the relationship with that in mind as a beginning. But that's hard to say whether that would happen.
Can I follow that up with one other question?
Sure, go ahead.
Do you, so there are a lot of obviously cultural exchange programs that are working on the ground level in other spheres. Do you see those continuing with the same, fervor, for lack of a better word, at present, despite the embargo, like specifically with regard to museums?
Sure.
State Department sponsored.
They are. And Masha, you should talk about the foundation that you're on the board of.
Yeah, I'm on the board of the American Siberian Education Foundation, and we just got and completed a grant from Eurasia Foundation with a Siberian partner from Novosibirsk, a museum. It's a private museum in Akademgorodok. We organized an exhibition online on our website of the foundation, and also in Novosibirsk, but only digital materials. So we sent everything digitally. There are video installations and photography. We wanted to bring the actual art into Novosibirsk, but because of the pandemic, so the pandemic situation does not contribute positively into the overall museum conflict or the art embargo situation here. And we are planning to work with our Siberian partners because we made a lot of friends to working on these projects. And I hope we are going to have an exhibition of contemporary Siberian photographers in our museum. But also when we worked on this grant, I realized there were a lot of restrictions on not just, they're not about the art embargo, but about the general relations between the two countries. For example, the Eurasia Foundation, which is an American-based grant-giving foundation, prohibited us to work with any governmental bodies or even people who worked for organizations that were on state budget. So we could not work with the University of Novosibirsk because it's a state university, we could not involve any of the museums. So we just strictly worked with a small private museum in Novosibirsk. So there were a lot of restrictions on that. But still, we completed the project, and we hope to, because it's so fun to work with our Russian colleagues. They're all, they wish well, they want to participate. There is a lot of curiosity and interest in what's going on here in the art scene. And so a people-to-people connect, and that's how that program was called with Eurasia, a people-to-people program. That's the way to go. As far as the art embargo, I think it's out of our hands as far as cultural organizations are concerned. It's very political now, and just working between museums won't resolve it.
If I may also follow up just with a quick note that unfortunately, Andrew, regarding your question, it seems like the situation is in some cases getting worse. Of course, there are some exchange programs and such, but what came to mind when you asked your question is that recently Bard College and this Wolny college which is in St. Petersburg in 2011, they started a partnership with the St. Petersburg University. Bard College was declared a foreign entity, and therefore that has the collaboration there has ceased. So it is rather alarming to see that the trend continues, and that it's not just a museum embargo, but that other collaborative projects are unfortunately joining this whole museum situation, and that there are other victims of the unfortunate new Cold War, shall we say.
So I see in the chat, there's a question, is there any collaboration with the Winnipeg Museum that could be seen as neutral territory? I guess you could expand that to any Canadian museum, and it's sort of in the vein, Michael, of what you were talking about with the European museums that you work with. Have you had any contact with the Canadian museums that are interested in those types of mutual collaborations?
I have not personally, but I think that's a wonderful idea. So whoever posed that question, thank you. I think that's a wonderful idea, because that means we don't have to go overseas, and if it's close enough to the US border and COVID restrictions are lifted, then that's an excellent idea where I think we can collaborate on North American soil.
And then there's another question about whether there's any possibility of reconciling the ownership of this library. And I think that really the Chabad organization simply wants the library back. I don't think they're at all interested in any sale. Obviously, that must have been broached at some point long ago if it was ever a remote possibility, but certainly has been shown to be the case. So I don't see anything else in the
We have one other participant with their hand up. Chuck.
Go ahead.
Yeah, in normal times without the embargo, can you give us a sense for what the volume really is that goes between the two countries? Is it mostly from Russia to us? Is it equal back to them? I'm trying to understand what it is that's really at risk, how large that exchange is.
Well, because of the financial parameters, my understanding is that it was mostly from Russia to the United States. And this is where this embargo, unfortunately, has caused self-harm for the Russian institutions. Is that the Russian institutions charge fees, and they get travel allowances and obviously prestige by lending specifically to the United States. I'm not talking about internationally. There are a number of exchanges that went the other way, but it's mostly the harm that's done, as I see it, to Russia itself, fully understanding the Chabad issue and the legal parameters of this tragedy. The fact is that American museums, if you're doing a great exhibition of Canaletto, as they were on the West Coast, where they had to return the two Canalettos that they borrowed from the Hermitage, you can get Canalettos from the Louvre, you can get Canalettos from all over Italy. It's not, you know, Russia in terms of non-Russian materials, and that's where most of the loans were coming from, isn't an absolute necessity other than a handful of very important masterpieces that maybe the Hermitage has. So what this has caused is a complete a cessation of this exchange, this cultural exchange between us and Russia, and for Americans to see Russian art that's owned by state entities. And that's really the focus of this and the tragedy of it.
Yeah, I want to second Kent here. So when countries travel their national art to other countries, it's mostly for their own benefit and for their own sake, because they promote the positive image of the country outside that country. So the embargo hurts Russia much more than it hurts us here in the US. Of course, we are deprived of looking at the masterpieces that Russian collections have, but there are Russian collections here. As far as the traveling treasures that Russia has outside Russia, and sharing and showing that this country is rich in cultural patrimony and heritage, and just creating a different image of Russia than we now have. That's what is really bad and tragic about this situation. It deprives our relationship of this significant component of this, you know, the cultural and artistic contribution that the people of the country made. So we see these political exchanges, sanctions, we see the bad face of Russia now in our media and in politics, but we are lacking this very beautiful human artistic component.
So
to underscore Masha's point, just a quick aside, if I may, there's an exhibition in Russia, in the Museum of Russian Impressionism in Moscow, which is putting together an exhibition that attempts to reconstruct an exhibition of Russian art, a little known exhibition of Russian art that took place in New York in 1924. And so as a result of the embargo, they cannot borrow many of the pieces that probably they could have gotten from the US. So it is hurting the Russians. I'm sure that they could have gotten more pieces that were in the initial 1924 exhibition had this embargo not been in place.
So we've come to the end of our hour, and I guess, you know, one thing that we all heard here today is that, you know, perhaps if there is some reinstitution of cultural exchange, that could be the beginning of broader improvement in relationships between the US and Russia. But I think we all acknowledge we're a long way from there at this point. So right now, I'd like to thank the panelists, Michael, Masha, and Kent. Also, as this is a joint program of the Museum of Russian Art and the Russian American Business and Culture Council, thank the RABCC President Todd Lefko and Sergei Kuznetsov, who handled the technical aspects of today's program. And thanks everyone for participating. And we hope to see you in future programs, both from the museum and RABCC. So have a great afternoon.